check. Okay. We've got good sound. Just making sure. Alright. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Alright. Here a little early. We've got about 90 seconds until the time beginning of the live stream. I'm going ahead and doing some final level checks, etc. So you'll hear more about what I'm up to in a moment. Just gonna let some people trickle in. For those of you joining us, this is Dizzy Songbirds. We're kicking it off. I'm going to go ahead and let Drunk Prince of Doris, a composition of mine, modal jazz, play through for a few minutes while people trickle in. And then we've got quite a show lined up for you tonight. It should be a little shorter than last week, but a little more power-packed. Stay tight. All right. I hope everybody is having a fantastic Wednesday so far. We've got a show lined up for you tonight. This is Dizzy Songbirds. I'm your host, Connor Lafitte. Tonight, as you can see, we're doing visual, so I'm screen sharing Logic, or at least the components that I have open in one of my monitors right here. And that's to share what I'm doing, because tonight I'm going to build classical compositions like some of the great Tin Pan Alley songwriters. Oh, looks like we're going in and out with some of the microphones. Sorry about that, folks. If you can see, we're having a monitor issue. Alright, we should be tight right now. Give me a flag if you have any issues with the audio stream itself, right there in the live chat for those of you that are watching right now on YouTube. More or less, the point of this is to troubleshoot the visual component of the show going forward. I figured out how to get the processing room to handle that, so it's going to give us the chance to, expose how the sausage is made a little bit more, and to give you a look into how to compose using Logic Pro and other digital audio software yourself. So I hope that you can draw some lessons from this. It brings an educational component into it. GarageBand functions very similar, so any of those listeners that are using a Mac, you can do this for free. You don't have to do all of this in fancy software like this. We can do behind the scenes stuff at any point, and if anyone's curious as to how I'm doing the signal flow for all of this, I'll pull that up real quick. More or less, to give you a quick breakdown, we have the Livestream as an external audio driver through something called Soundflower, and then I'm running on every channel an extra monitor that's coming to me especially, and also to some noise reduction in a vocal chain that we have here on the left. And so it saves a lot of processing room to bus everything together like that. And also, usually we would do pre-recorded audio as opposed to MIDI, but we're going to be songwriting in real time. So if you're comfortable with the way I used to do this live stream, which is a little bit faster paced, but a little less real-time composing when it came to some of the musical demonstrations, that's the part that's been expanded. So Dizzy Songbirds is live beat making. That's one way to think of it. And all of you, just for listening tonight, will be rewarded with the MP3 that we make here. If you subscribe to my Patreon, think of it like a stock music subscription. You also get unlimited license use for the songs we make here on the show. So if you're a vocal artist, you can lease the beat just by subscribing. You can go ahead and jump on that, make your own track, release it, monetize it, Spotify, Apple Music, SoundCloud, however you want to, unlimited license. The same is true for podcasters and videographers if you need master use or video sync. I package those two together. It's very easy for you to get access to the songs that you do on the show, so go ahead and click on that. Patreon link should be in the comments. Otherwise, you can, just shoot me an email at connor@connorlafitte.com. Tonight, we should be making something a little catchy. We're still trying this model out, so I know last week we ended up with a kind of rugged composition that I wouldn't necessarily say meets the bar for playing in public a second time, so we might go ahead and archive that composition. But tonight, I hope to make something a little less raw. If it feels too raw, don't worry. Before the MP3 download, it takes about 24 hours. I mix that, give it a light master, a little bit of sound design to sculpt the edges and make sure that it streams okay. And then I also draft out the license, and usually I'll have a blog post if we have more of a historical element. So, as promised, last week I will talk about the Mellotron and kind of the birth of digital sampling. That's coming. In the meantime, my blog talks about podcast composition and kind of what my business model is. So if you want to go to the blog, it's on my website under the About section. There is now content up there, and there will be content coming about what we're talking about tonight. So what are we talking about tonight? We're talking about Chopin and how an unpublished composition of his surfaced, largely because it was something that training pianists would rely on as somewhat of an etude. Chopin was the standard for the standard makers, but it resurfaced in jazz standards in the late war period, the First World War. So this is 1918, and then again in the late 30s. And in both cases, the melody was just borrowed, just veiled enough, or, as you'll see, its use was strained enough, taken out of the original kind of sonic context that Chopin wrote it for in solo piano, to have a completely different function. So I'm going to play it real quick, and then I'm going to play you, because this is a reference to an episode we did on my initial version of this show, American Songbirds, back in May. I'll also play you a little snippet of that, because I'm going to give you a preview of what we do on the show. So first, this is going to be Chopin and his impromptu, Fantasie impromptu, opus number 66. This is C sharp minor. Remember, this is unpublished. Whoop, sorry about that. Put it on the wrong piano track. So what I'm doing right now, for those listeners that are curious, I have a couple different pianos pre-selected. These are just some samplers that I based off of presets on the left there in the Logic library. I do that because if I run external piano plugins, they're going to run a lot more CPU. It's going to drive up the computer, and since I'm already running open broadcast streaming, as well as Chrome, some Evernote stuff, and things that you see here at the bottom, I want to make sure that I keep that CPU tight. So Iowa Piano here, this is University of Iowa Music School live sampling plugin. It's free. It's got somewhat of an earthy sound. It sounds a little video game music-y on its own. As you heard just a minute ago, it's kind of like theater. So I like to triple track these together, and then you end up with kind of a Beatles piano. It's still psychedelic, but psychedelic's better than like fake Casio keyboard. So let's go ahead and give Chopin a listen on the Bosendorfer. Okay, so what I do when I make this show is I basically play out these standards by hand. Sometimes that means that I have a couple takes, etc. But when I'm doing it, I don't have to get it perfect, because I can come in and edit the MIDI right here, which will generate different sounds. So like, for instance, pull that out, right? I could delete that. And then it would sound differently. I can record over it. So I approximate, and then I perfect it afterwards. And Logic will then auto-generate the score. Now, this obviously isn't pretty, and it doesn't get a lot of the formatting right, but I can export that and then edit that in Finale or whatever I want. So as I'm generating originals from melodies like I am tonight, it's always helpful to get that melody into MIDI form. So right here, this is note for note what Chopin penned, right? He didn't make it look this out of control, because this is automatically generated. But that's what the notes are for the most part. There might be some simplifications because I got that from a lead sheet, which was drawn from a lead sheet, etc. So sheet music itself, it's kind of the original file sharing, and we'll get into that a little more in just a second. Excuse me. All right, so who messed with this? The first one was Harry Carroll in 1917. for the Broadway play. It was a vaudeville show called Oh Look with the Dolly sisters. They were twins, and they would be belting this on stage. So, I'm always chasing rainbows, right? So if you listen to that top melody that we just heard right there, I'll play it over some more jazz influenced chords, and hopefully my voice won't crack quite as much again. Right? So Judy Garland got up there in 1939, 1941, and really made this melody famous for I'm Always Chasing Rainbows. She took what was a vaudeville tune that Harry Carroll had written, and which is ironically made famous by Harry Fox. He was a vaudeville singer and an early musicians' rights activist. He's got a whole royalties company named after him. He made a huge profit off of a stolen melody when he was young, right? Just starting his career. Even funnier, Harry Carroll, the songwriter, right? The composer of I'm Always Chasing Rainbows, was head of ASCAP at the time that he would have written this song, just a year before it appeared on Broadway. So the person who was pioneering publishing royalties in America, which has become the global standard, was also stealing melodies straight out of Chopin. Now, you've got to give these guys credit because, first off, they invented publishing royalties in a sense in America, or at least they wildly contributed to the structures that exist nowadays. But on top of that, Chopin wasn't really intellectual property at the time. And on top of that, everybody that was anybody that had grown up playing piano, whether you played it, in a sheet music store as a what they called a music plugger, where your job was to just play the latest hits all day, or if you were actually a classical trained pianist, either way, you would have studied Chopin at some point, because this is like the sheet music that's available at the turn of the century for young pianists, right? So regardless, stolen melody, right? Or borrowed melody, because if Harry Fox, is fine with us borrowing this, then that's who we would check with in a way to see if it's okay to use that recording and that composition. So Hoagy Carmichael borrows it for the Judy Garland version, or right after before the Judy Garland version gets famous. Excuse me, I get these dates wrong because I mix it up with the start of World War II. It's all going on at the same time. 39, 2 years before Judy Garland makes I'm Always Chasing Rainbows more famous and adds a sensitive element to a vaudeville song, right? Think about lyrically what she does. I'm always chasing. I can't go up where Judy does, but I actually I should have a little recording of her cut into this. Let's see if this plays. Yeah, so this is what we made on the show back in May, and you'll hear her voice come in on the melody in this in a quick sample. Again, give me a holler if anything's wrong with the audio and the Right, so this is the type of beat we make on the show. This was an old R&B 90s flip that we did based off of this exact melody. But Judy Garland brings it that childlike innocenceness for which she's so famous, right? It characterizes her wartime Hollywood voice. Initially, it was kind of a vaudeville drunken anthem, right, when Harry Carroll wrote it. So in a way, Judy Garland is bringing it back to like the sensitive Chopin, French pre-impressionist. Anyway, Hoagy Carmichael, 2 years before, in 1939, right, pens another jazz standard using the same melody, I Get Along Without You Very Well, made famous by a couple different people, but Chet Baker, Frank Sinatra, Billie Holiday, I believe, does a version. Throughout the 50s, it was kind of a popular romantic heartbreak standard. The lyrics are written on a poem by amateur poet James Brown Thompson, right? Sad story. You can read about it in the blog post that I'll be releasing in the next few days. Her identity goes unknown until she dies the night before the song written using her lyrics that she doesn't know about is released on national radio, right? So jazz is full of heartbreak. There's a little bit of it. But anyway, I have a quick recording of that stolen melody. I happened to have the mic on when I did a rehearsal earlier today on the guitar, and we'll see if this one comes through. So, unfortunately, that's all I have of that clip. That song I'll be releasing at some point. But you can see it goes hard in the paint on that sensitive, heartbroken angle. So, only because of a weird vaudeville interpretation, in my assessment, and it sounds weird to the modern ear, in 1917, 1918, right? A song plugger, Harry Carroll, pens vaudeville interpretation for the stage for twins to belt out about how they don't take life seriously, generally. Judy Garland transitions that into kind of teenage, what do I do with my life thing, you know, just like Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It's all about the Judy Garland rainbow, right? That is after, not before, Hoagy Carmichael, brilliant Broadway composer, right? Songwriter, American legend, already realizes probably that that sensitive Chopin angle is where the juice and the money is with this melody, so he goes for that. So why would songwriters in the 19th century want to sample, or in the early 20th century, want to sample Chopin in the first place? Well, a big part is that it's free. Oh, good. Thanks for calling out some of those audio problems. So, what I'm going to do now, because I want to make sure you can hear that, we're going to pop a new audio track, and I'm just going to drop it right into Logic. That way you can hear the two mixes I was talking about back to back. So remember, when you hear me previously on the show doing any of these shenanigans where I'm fiddling around, this is what I'm actually up to. So it's not just dropping things into Logic so that they'll stream correctly. I also have to then assign the outputs to that, and I try to do it fast. The reason it looks laggy is because my computer's laggy. I can do it a lot quicker than this if I needed to. So here's my version. Oops. I get along without you very well. Same melody. Of course I do. Them back into modern R&B cuts, and then you get to take it home with you and you get to use it. So once again, we find ourselves in a position where an entire feel, an entire almost, I won't say like style of music, but a very popular jazz standard followed by another titan jazz standard, two that would easily rank in the top 50 for most people's assessment that would know hundreds of jazz songs, right, are based off of a relatively freshly stolen Chopin melody, right? Now, they're borrowed humbly, right? We've excused them for that use because this is the way music is made and nobody should have a problem with it. But that means that there's a little bit to explore here, and I want to see how that model could work for us. So first we have to find our own historical melody, right? We've already messed with this one, as you heard, and that interpretation will be released soon. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out our Chopin, but there are a few things I want to point out first. So if you listen to the original interpretation of this song, So even without tempo adjustment or swing put on, I'm not playing it right now, you'll notice that you wouldn't really be able to put a beat under this, right? It's also building tensions and phrases over multiple measures, right? It's not looped. You couldn't create it on a drum machine. And you also would have a hard time writing predictable bass lines to that, right? Now, that's just a natural differentiation between two styles of music and centuries of perceived audience on the part of the songwriter. But when we're working with it now, and remember, our narrow goal here is to make an R&B cut that slaps out of this, not to contribute to the pantheon of classical music. We're going to have to simplify the chord structure. That doesn't mean we're just going to do, or something basic. So in the past, when I've done this, so you get a sense before the Chopin is off the screen here, I've blocked it out to break it down into chord structures we can see and manipulate. And then I can also match those to bass lines. So right now, these are the chords to I Get Along Without You Very Well. This is from a jazz lead sheet, right? So what I did was I played out the way Chet Baker would, on the piano, and then I matched the time up and then played that melody over and synced everything up, time quantized, and it sounds something like... So now suddenly you've got a little more of a rhythmic, certainly a harmonically predictable piece than you had before. So in case these get in our way, I'm going to pull that out. So what do I have to work with? Well, we're going to go back to, Chopin's influence on jazz and where else he had an influence. So part of the reason that Chopin was so popular isn't just because people were reaching back about 80 years in 1918 to look for Chopin. It's because Chopin had made his stamp on classical music, of course, as well. And French Impressionism has its hands deep in the cookie butter jazz and vice versa, because they were somewhat overlapping in the first 20 to 30 years of jazz. And so Claude Debussy and especially Maurice Ravel and George Gershwin on the other side of the Atlantic were learning a lot from Chopin. You can look into direct influences, in classical musicology, etc. But just for some general ideas, bass drones and influence in like Polish folk music. Now think about the bass drone in particular, just like a continuing... Now that certainly has a place in jazz. You might have heard it in the intro, which was kind of a bebop-inspired modal jazz piece, which uses a piano bass. But that's also something, that you can see throughout. A more direct influence is that you had, in the Cambridge Companion to Chopin, you'll see that Debussy was drawing directly from the way that he was messing with fourths and suspending chords, etc. So there was a lot of drawing into Chopin. So we're going to play with something by Ravel. So Maurice Ravel, right? Look him up on Wikipedia. I don't want to take up too much time because we're getting up to about the 30-minute mark. But more or less, at age 24, he composed Pavane for a Dead Princess, right? He's in music school at the time, studying under Gabriel Fauré, who wrote Clair de Lune, and really pushed the French Impressionist sound into the mainstream at the turn of the century, right? So this is epitome turn of the century, like high-minded impressionist music. If you were a songwriter with classical training looking for a hit, and it was like 1915, you would have studied what Ravel had written about 15, 16 years before in school. You'd also be paying attention to what Ravel was doing in the popular eye, because these were kind of like the rock stars of their time for people who played piano. George Gershwin even joked that he wanted to take lessons from Ravel at one point. Allegedly, he did a lot of self-promoting too. But anyway, Pavin for un enfant défunt, basically Spanish dance for a dead princess, kind of a very self-aware, heady, sad, heartbreaking piece. And let's give it a listen on piano. Pay attention to the melody, pianist, that's going to be in the right hand. It's going to be that, like, this thing, excuse me, that thing right there that I soloed if you're watching the video. That's what we're going to be messing with, and I pulled it down right here. Okay, a lot going on there harmonically, and I even pulled out the left hand. I'm going to give you an orchestral version. This is actually a simplified arrangement that includes just a saxophone and a piano, I believe. But he did do a full orchestral version in 1910 due to the response to the kind of melancholy and nostalgia that's inherent to this piece, the loss that's so deep within the harmonic structure. He did it with 2 flutes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, all of that stuff. So, folks, also, I don't have the ability to check my phone while I'm doing this, so if anybody does have my number and they're texting me about problems with the audio, I won't be able to see it. Just a heads up for the future, I do post my number on the website, so this is not something that I hide as a business number. But yeah, feel free to use the live chat for anything, but just know that I can't respond to texts usually during it. It's a cool FYI. In the meantime, right, so we've got a simplified version of Ravel here. I'm going to give you a sense of what the Impressionist orchestra would have done with it, right? So this would be a very flute-based, string-based, a lot of what we think of when we think of like movie scores from the 40s, Casablanca, etc., those sweeping strings. And as you learn if you keep listening to this show, a lot of Motown strings also pull from French classical instrumentation, right? So this is what this would have looked like with just a saxophone and a piano, but I want to give you a sense of the melody so that you can capture it in your mind. Oh, you know what? That encoder actually isn't working. So instead, what we can do is play it down here. I'm going to drop this into a, I'll put it on a flute synth. We'll get kind of like a Metro Boomin thing going here for fans of that. Yeah, I just realized that it's a file that wouldn't be supported currently if I try to play it on that. So give me 2 seconds. I'm going to work some magic, find a quick preset which won't use up CPU. Logic usually has some fun strings and flutes. We're going to go... yeah, we'll give that a shot. Now I just have to assign it to the live stream. For those of you that are watching the video, that's what's going on. And then we'll have something groovy going. 2 seconds. You can do all this in Pro Tools too. If you're interested in hiring me out for this type of work, I'm fluent in a number of DAWs. You can take a peek at my website at connorlafitte.com/audio. And I have some mixing samples, etc. You can listen to my portfolio. It's linked there. That also features my audio service offering, so podcast editing, etc. Editing, rawr. I'm starting to get a little dry mouth here, talking too much. Let's take a sip and slow down. It's good there's not a camera, because I just dumped hot tea down the front of the synthesizer. Alright, so I digress. This is what the Pavin would sound like in its natural form. reason that movie scoring was heavily influenced by this type of writing, especially when it was orchestral. I wanted to show it to you one more time with the chords so you can see what that sounds like in action harmonically, because it's a little more complicated. It doesn't really resolve. So if I put the metronome on, you'll notice that at the end of every 4 bars or so, it doesn't resolve the way an easy R&B or hip-hop loop would work. So we're going to have to do something a little funkier with this. By the way, folks, on Dizzy Songbirds, I try not to change melodies too much. It creatively restricts us, which is more interesting. So I'm not going to move notes to create a simpler song structure here. I did that a little bit with the Chopin, but that's only because the original Hoagie Carmichael version that I was basing it off of and syncing it up with did that. In this case, I'm making a fully original beat under what won't even be, by the time we're done with it, a composition use. We're not even borrowing, since we will be changing the rhythm. We've already simplified that, so what you're seeing right here isn't quite what the piano solo by Ravel would have looked like. In addition to that, we're going to be creatively changing the nature of the work. And since this is Ravel, its turn of the century, this is early on when publishing and composition rights were being messed with. So I'm not going to reprint the sheet music, but I can play a little bit of the melody as long as it's not exactly note by note, rhythm by rhythm. Even then, I'm walking in murky water, up to my knees. You can face a heck of a lawsuit for this, and in fact, it often does matter. If you're curious about the legal world of sampling, take a look at my website. I'm beginning to accumulate some useful resources but in terms of me stacking this on and your license to recreate it, to use it, it's not really any different than a DMX song that would have been playing a Beethoven-based, type of thing, or a Bach type of thing on those 2000s rap horns. You know what I'm talking about? Like that dun 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 dun. And beyond that, if a publishing or a music license company were to take issue with my reproduction sonically in this derivative work, they'd have quite an expensive case to make. What they'd probably do is just try to muscle me off the internet with a DMCA takedown. That won't happen to you. My leases protect you in this case if you were to use this, but folks, it's also not a sample, and it's not like you're, Robin Thicke rewriting a Marvin Gaye song with Pharrell with like one change and then claiming you never heard the original. Instead, that's not how the case went down. But so let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to use this whole thing, all, 15, 16 measures of this. It's probably around 12. What I'm going to do is pull, so that we know what we're working with, pull this down onto the Kanye synth. Okay. Now we're getting a little Stranger Things with it. It's almost like the soundtrack to an 80s or early 90s type of thing. If we pull the Bosey down into the Kanye synth, I want to show you what that sounds like just over the melody. So that's the Bosendorfer piano line. This is the chords that are a little too classical for us to work with. But notice how that creative angle, that where our mind went there, that it's 80s soundtrack, is enhanced when you hear the chords. In a city. You can almost hear like the trailer for some post-apocalyptic like skateboard movie or something. So 80s. Okay, well, from an instrumentation perspective, we can work with that. We know what we have to mess with. Because we don't want to go with anything that's going to fight that angle too hard. Creatively, we want to be conscious of that as we're designing other synths. So I've got a couple presets down here. I could show you. Let's bring the melody down so you could see what it would sound like there. Again, I'm going to play these together. Oops, sorry, we got a little laggy there. Come on. Alright, we're just going to loop that so that we don't have this problem. Alright, different combos. There's the flutes. We'll go to a stack. Okay. That's a little bit more intense. Alright, all of these options more or less point to the same creative direction. It's just a question of how they blend musically. So when you're making decisions like this, it's best to not get too into the weeds, right? We know the direction we're going, and you can always mess with the synths, even though Logic presets like this one, for instance, if you're looking at the screen now, I can adjust this sound wildly and make it do all sorts of things, right? I can mess with the software instrument. Right, I can pick all that up afterwards. I don't need to perfect this. So if you're just drafting a short composition for a podcast or trying to make a beat for your buddy to jump on or something, and you're doing this in GarageBand, don't get too complicated when you're picking an instrument. Know that you can tweak it. Just go for something that pops right off the bat, right? Because your entire function after this is to chisel this block of ice you've made sonically into what you want. But for right now, we still need to add on to it, right? We're not at the mixing stage. We're going to try to be adding in new instruments. And we've only got about 7 minutes here to come up with a beat. So we're on the clock now. So I'm going to put those chords to the side. And I'm going to put the melody back on the Kanye synth, right? And I'm going to play my own chords on this guy right here. And I've taken a look at the composition. I think I should be able to improvise or at least come up with something that kicks a little bit and brings it in a completely different direction, the same way that these early songwriters would have taken a Chopin line and pulled it into vaudeville or into jazz or other genres. So we can start there. We are in F major. And I'm going to do that bass in the left hand, and we'll give it some rhythm. So I'm going to make sure that we have my metronome ready to go. Alright, let's go for it. 2, 3. Okay, alright, we have an idea for it. I'm going to run that back. There's a little bit of a lag, so I want to make sure that I'm playing it right. I'm going to turn the metronome off. Alright, and if I'm butchering the sound, I'm hoping it's coming through right on your end. Give me a holler, but sometimes the audio drivers will get synced up wrong, and you might have like a couple sample seconds delay. It's just a bug in the streaming software. It's not really designed to be streamed up to Logic like this and to be doing all that at once. On top of that, I'm on like a 2012 MacBook right here. But trust me, if you subscribe to the Patreon, or if you just shoot me an email at connor@connorlafitte.com, or if you just stay on the email list you're probably already on, you'll get a perfected MP3 of this that doesn't have any of the weird glitching going on now. Alright, so let's do this on take 2. Okay, cool. Alright, so since we were looping, we ended up with some weird crap at the beginning there. But we got what we need, right? Because now, what we can do is take this MIDI and quantize it, right? And now we're good to go. We've got a song. So I gave it a kind of a driving funk rhythm right there. Obviously leaning towards the natural advantages of this sort of Juno sounding synth that we've used. It's a preset here. But you don't have to commit, remember. So if I clean this up, and then we can loop it and stuff. But for now, I just want to make sure that I'm keeping track of everything. We can pull that down into other instrument fields, see how it sounds. Whoa, crap, sorry guys. Alright, so we don't have a pretty good attack time on the flutes. The instrument is going to respond too slow. We'll want something else that's a little funnier. Too heavy. Alright, that's okay. Sometimes you can retreat. You can double track that and try it on one of the pianos. Maybe something that's not too intense. Yeah, not the Iowa piano, because remember it's got that haunting sound. There we go. So that's gonna build out the chord structure a little more. You'll hear some of those harmonics coming through. It'll also draw out sour notes. So you want to put it on something bright when you're making sure that what you added over, you know, this classical melody line that you're drawing from, yeah, you want to make sure that it actually works harmonically. Because what have I done here? I've wildly simplified the instrumentation. So Ravel uses, you know, 8, 9 orchestral instruments to give the tone and the timbre and especially the harmonic structure. Even in the piano version, though, he still has several different voices, right? He's doing multiple notes in the left and the right hand. I've taken a lot of that out, and I've also taken a lot of the variation out. So I've removed like suspended seconds. For the most part, I kept one in at the end. But I've also added in major 7th diatonic jazz harmonic structure. Right? So if we're in F, I've kept it to G minor, A minors, right? B flat. Then you can go C dominant. That's going to be your dominant. Right? Another 7th minor on the D. And you can diminish that E. But that's standard jazz songwriting stuff, right? So I've brought this into the 20th century in terms of its harmony. What does that give us the opportunity to do? Well, it solves that looping problem we had earlier, right? I couldn't put rhythm over this, because the piano's already doing that. That's the job of the right hand and the left hand in the piano here. It's a piano solo. And with that, kind of like a DJ, it's written, Ravel wrote it, to have immense control over the tempo, right? The pianist can start and slow it. Even here, I'm not messing with the tempo. It's straight tempo played by a computer, and you can hear it slowing up and you know, in the mind, there are these compressions and refractions. But with ours, now we have a much more natural sense of loop and rhythm. Right, you can hear it under there. The lag makes it really hard for me to to snap into the mic. Right, so I've got a couple preset drums, 808s. I've also got some trap bass. As it's known, so that's a, you know, gonna be like a mini Moog or like a synthesized bass line, and you pull the attack just down almost nothing so that it hits kind of like this. I have lots of videos, and there are lots of videos on YouTube where you show how to do that, but if you like that effect in a lot of contemporary music, it's birthed in sampling in 90s hip-hop, and we're gonna do specials about that and other hip-hop hip hop instrumentation in particular. For now, let's see what else we got. This is a different like 808 combo sample thing. Logic presets for beats. Again, if you're just getting out Logic Pro or GarageBand and trying this out, the point is to give you an easy demonstration to start on. We're not going to get into mixing or sound design or anything. You can rely on these Logic presets and these GarageBand presets when it comes to hip hop and R&B beats. You don't have to tweak them too much. I have some compression and EQing, so it's ideally comes through the live stream okay, but I'm not going to tweak that too hard. Okay, we're ready to go. So the kick's gonna have to drive with that left hand. It's almost like Electric Light Orchestra or any of those. Man, this microphone is distorting my voice. Any of those 70s kind of like synth rock pop, they're gonna have that, and when it really is coming out of funk music, that like driving rhythm. Dun 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 dun. And you can slow it down and speed it up, but it still has that emphatic sense of suspension, in the first beat. So I'm gonna try, because we've got just a few minutes here left, to lay a beat under this, and we'll see how it feels, and then we can compare it between the two. Let's go. Okay, so again, the goal isn't to get everything spot on. It's to get it close enough for a few bars so that you can go back in. I was actually not as far off as I thought. But, you know, if I zoom in and look at the notes here, I was leading the beat after about a measure, which is not surprising. I caught it back in on the kick. Good for me. I would expect that. I do this for a living. Hey, he can hit the one. He must be a producer. But I can tighten this up, and it'll hit tight. So with that, we've only got a few minutes left. I want to make sure we have time. Remember, a couple takeaways from today. First, have a large processor on your computer if you're even going to attempt this type of stuff. Because I'm really straining right here. You can see my CPU's maxing out up here, right there. But two, you can draw lots of melodies from classical music. You don't have to worry about matching the chord structure or the harmonics, right? I simplified this, and it solved a rhythmic problem, right? Which is essentially the same thing that these early vaudeville songwriters were doing, the giants of American music sampling, right? The people who figured out how to take not entire songs or ways of thinking about music, but to just borrow one or two little bits and pieces here because they were catchy sound bites, right? Harry Carroll, guys like that, the men and women who wrote these early jazz standards and penned the lyrics to them, they were stealing bits and pieces, and then they were simplifying it without losing or compromising parts of the melody that gave it emotional gravity, right? But they were completely changing other elements of the music, adapting it to a modern ear, for modern piano players who might not have as much training, for modern singers, for live performance, for the street instead of for the concert hall or the Royal Hall. How were they doing this? Well, they were borrowing bits and pieces and they were adapting them, right, with different instrumentation to signal different thoughts, images, childhood associations, etc. You play this game of signifiers. And as we talked about with sampling last week in the Mellotron, the ability to recognize when a musical soundbite is compelling and then move it into an almost digital format where you're moving that sample around in real time, to add it over other pieces of music and make something new, something that has a different emotional meaning, maybe more modern emotional meaning, maybe more specific. But in either case, this is pre-digital technique, the ability to take a soundbite. People were doing it 100 years ago, and they were doing it with melodies. So you can make an almost Stranger Things type intro that for the most part makes musical sense, and you can do it in just a few minutes by putting some chords under an original melody. Now, I don't know how long it would have taken me to pen a melody as historically interesting as Pavan for a Dead Princess. Probably a lifetime if I ever accomplished something like that. But because it's a compelling melody, I can borrow bits and pieces of it and put it in a new context. And if you're artful about the way that you borrow like this, like if I'm not betraying what Maurice Ravel's original vision for the song is, first of all, do your legal homework. If you're actually going to steal a melody, you're going to get in trouble, right? I can get away with this because this is classical music, right? And even then, because it's only from about 120 years ago, 121 years ago, I might get in trouble. Because somebody owns the sheet music to this as a composition. But for the most part, if you go back to classical music, you can draw melodies like this and they can really hit. And all you have to do is be smart about how you deploy your instrumentation. I'm going to stop jawing at you because we're out of time. This has been Dizzy Songbirds. American Songbirds is the previous iteration of the show where we did a lot of live sampling as well. If you subscribe to my Patreon, that's patreon.com/DizzySongbirds. It's $15 a month, and you get a creative license. That's an audio master use license as well as a sync license to use these musical works that we make live on the show in any of your own podcasts. If you're a rapper, you can spit on them. If you're a producer or DJ, you want to use them, go ahead. You can make money off them, etc. Subscribe to the Patreon or send me an email at connor@connorlafitte.com. All you listeners, if you're on my email list, are going to get a download of this song when it's been perfected. I'm going to stay up late and do it tonight. And it'll be a more drawn-out Stranger Things, vaguely 80s drama movie like type beat. And something might happen with it. But since it's so sonically compelling, feel free to use it in your show, etc. So smash that subscribe button. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the show. Continue to subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com, as you know. Soon, when I get enough subscribers, I'll be able to get my own URL slug to throw at the end of that, so it'll be much simpler. You can find me on my website at connorlafitte.com, Lafitte. I've had a lot of fun tonight showing you the nuts and bolts. Usually, I don't work with as many presets, and usually I'll have a little bit more complicated of a music mix when I'm actually creating something, as a product here. But for live mixing and a live stream with one computer, I think this is a pretty good system. We're going to continue this next week on Dizzy Songbirds while we continue to explore how you can take hooks from history to make hits. So continue to subscribe, hit that like.